Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Kayleen White, and Kayleen's a pagan. A pagan. We'll talk a lot about paganism, but where did it start for you? What was your first spiritual religious experience?
Actually started when I was relatively young. As a primary school or preschool child, my mother wanted me to go to Sunday school. She was an Anglican, and although she tended to believe more in service to the community rather than necessarily going to church on a Sunday, she thought that I should have a fairly conventional Anglican upbringing. And one day the teacher that we had at Sunday school said that animals had no soul, and I was rather distressed by this, so I thought, no, that doesn't feel quite right. I know that there's a difference between soul and personality, but it just was inconceivable to me that the animals that we had as pets had no existence after death, and as a result of that I started to be, I guess, a little bit wary of what I was being taught, and to think that perhaps if there's another way I should perhaps look at that rather than necessarily following in the same path.
So how old were you when this was happening?
I would have been around about 6.
All right, so it's quite early.
Quite early, yeah.
And that, do you know where that arose from? Was it just innate?
I think it was innate. As I said, my adoptive mother was religious, and I've made contact with my birth family, and they also have strong spiritual views. So it may be partly genetic, it may be innate, but it's... Okay.
Yeah. So your birth family's views were they pagan views or no?
No, they were, I think, mostly Lutheran.
But still spiritual views.
Still spiritual views, yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting to be as young as that and have that awareness. So what happened then? Did you stay with the church?
I stayed with church. I felt that it was important to have some form of expression of my desire to be a spiritual person. I actually wound up being confirmed as an Anglican, but in my early teens I started to become a little bit disheartened, I guess you'd say. There were people who I guess I'd call Sunday Christians who would go to church and talk about love, and on the Sunday, and then on the Monday they'd happily stab you in the back at work. So I started to think that, well, this is not looking too good.
So in those days, what did love look like for you? What were you thinking about when you perceived this love?
Right,
in your teens.
It was a fairly immature version of love, probably an idealised version. I was thinking that love would involve perhaps actively caring for other people on a one-to-one or face-to-face basis, trying to do things like encourage schoolmates to not be quite so nasty towards each other. Just generally being as caring as you could towards people, and being perhaps kind is a good word to use.
And that would also extend to animals, I suppose, would it?
Absolutely, yeah. I was fortunate to be raised in a family where we always had pets, and to some extent that was a benefit in that we came to see the natural cycle of life and death. We also had the opportunity to start learning to care about another living creature. So if you've got a bird that needs to have its food recharged so that it can eat, then it's quite a useful practical lesson in terms of caring for other people.
Caring for others, yes. Okay, we're in our teens,
Yeah.
and we move on. We go to university. Is that right?
Well, actually, while I'm still in the teens,
Still in the teens, right? Okay.
That was when I started searching around a little bit more actively, and I came across Buddhism at that stage. And I didn't know any other Buddhists. I was living in a small country town in Queensland, basically it was too hot to do anything much, but I liked what I read about Buddhism. I liked the intellectual rigour. I liked the focus on compassion. So I started exploring it, and by the time I got to my late teens, I was quite happily identifying as a Buddhist without perhaps really knowing too much about what it was, what sort of rituals and practices were involved, other than meditation and being mindful about what I was once doing.
Okay. Just going back to the Christian context, there was insufficient of that in Christianity. You weren't able to draw on it?
To some extent I was. I can remember at one stage when I was a kid, I used to work out little rituals to do. I'd make a note, okay, on this day I'm going to read such and such passages from the Bible and do this prayer and set the table for parents, and that's my good service for the day. Which they actually didn't like, because I'd be trying to do it at 5:30 in the morning when they're trying to sleep, and I'm trying to put things down quietly. Clink, clink, clink.
Yes, it's just such an interesting transition into Buddhism, and it ties back into your desire to express that love in a caring and committed way. Okay, we're in our late teens. We've done that. How old would you be when you were fully fledged Buddhist?
Well, I was probably calling myself Buddhist by the time I was 16.
So, okay, right.
But as I said, I didn't know any Buddhists. The only experience I really had was what I could read in books.
And what books were you reading?
Some of the fairly controversial ones by Lobsang Rampa, and some generic books, generic texts on Buddhism as well.
The Dhammapada and things like that as well.
Sorry?
The Dhammapada, did you read that?
No.
That's
just...
it's not prescribed reading, it's fine. It's fine, I just wanted to ask. But we'll finish on Buddhism, we'll take a break, and we'll come back to this story of your spiritual evolution. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Kayleen White, and Kayleen is a pagan. Okay, we were tracing your history, Kayleen, and we're up to the point now where you're in your late teens, and you've been a Buddhist for quite a little while. What happened then?
I went to university.
Right.
So it involved moving 1,000 kilometres away from the little town of Mackay, and finding a residential college in Brisbane, studying, of all things, engineering.
Right.
And in general, I was getting in contact with a whole range of intellectual approaches. There's a lot of variety in everything. There was mountain climbing I was intrigued with, but I never quite got around to taking that up before the course got too busy to think about it. But just the general attitude of questioning, I started to think from that maybe I should be looking a little bit more widely and see what else there was, in case I'd made a decision that was a little bit premature and based on too little evidence. When I was trying to work out a career, I told my father I wanted to be an architect, and he said I should read further back in the alphabet. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't making the same mistakes. As a result, I just basically read as much as I could. I found a few New Age and metaphysical bookshops, and as a result I read anything I could, really. Theosophy, probably at that stage the one that appealed to me most, though, was shamanism.
Okay.
So I started, as best as I could without knowing anybody, to try and explore that a little bit. that stage there were some Buddhist centres starting to open up in Australia. I planned to go to a couple of retreats and never quite got there because usually coursework prevented me from having the time.
Yeah.
But at the end of 4 years I should say, I had a strong interest in shamanism and a job back in Mackay, so I headed back there and decided I'd do whatever I could.
Mm-hmm. And what did that look like? You mean just sort of practice as a shaman, or what?
Tried to. At that stage, my understanding of shamanism was based on the use of drumming to cause, I guess you'd say, a light trance state, so that you could enter what the shaman refers to as the underworld, or they also have an overworld as well. But it was a way of contacting spirits and energies in the natural world.
Yes.
So that appealed to me quite a bit. And the only problem is that it's very hard to do your own drumming and then be in trance at the same time.
That's right. They tend to cancel one another out.
They do a little bit, yes.
So you've actually done some solitary work, haven't you? In the sense that you took on the Buddhism without having Buddhists around you, and then shamanism the same thing.
Yeah.
So you've been powerfully seeking something.
Yes.
Yes. Right.
And to quite an extent, that's why eventually I left Mackay and came back down to Melbourne. I'd lived here as a child, and we moved up to Mackay when I was 12.
Okay.
And after 12 years of the coldest day being maybe 25 degrees and you know, most of the time 36 degrees and about 120% humidity, I decided I'd like to have a change of weather apart from anything else. And I wanted to come back to a larger city which would give me the chance to talk to a few people, meet a few other people, and not just have to try and do things on my own.
Yes. And did that work out? How did you find that?
It worked out quite well, actually. I've made quite a few friends. I wound up making contact with, I guess I'd say, a New Age group, or it's really more of a combination of New Age and spiritualist. And I also went to a few colleges, studied things like shiatsu, so I had quite an interest in alternative healing.
Yes.
So I was able to make contact with other people and start actually practicing with somebody to say, well, no, you don't actually put your thumb in the eye, you put your thumb beside them to put the pressure on. And,
right.
So, yeah, I was able to get the guidance that I was looking for and an opportunity to do things in the practical way in the physical world. Right.
So when you use the term New Age, what did that look like? Because New Age encompasses so much.
Yeah. This group encompassed quite a bit.
So
they believed in contact with aliens, spirit rescue, channeled energy healing, past life reincarnation, which was a particular interest of mine, working with crystals, mediumship. So it was quite a range.
It was quite a range.
Yeah.
And spiritualism, was that sitting in there as well?
The guy who ran the group had a background that originally came from spiritualism, and he broadened it out to include things like the past lives and crystals. Although there's quite a few spiritualist churches in my experience now that really also include a lot of these other activities.
Yeah. So where did you go from there?
I started teaching. There was a healing group in the Mornington Peninsula that I was travelling to from Oakley, and the couple who were running that were unable to continue with the group, so I wound up moving to Frankston and renting a lovely old house with stained glass windows so that I could start running an alternative healing group. And I've often found that the best way to teach or to learn something is to teach it or try to teach it.
Right. So the healing, what sort of healing? Was shiatsu, but what else did you do?
It was similar to Reiki, what's called Reiki now, but without the formality of it. So basically, people call it hands-on or spiritual healing.
Right.
So very similar to Reiki, but without the formalised visualisations and formalised sequence of positions of hands.
Okay. Okay, so as you say, less formal. Did you? But I think actually what's happening now, and I'm just holding myself in abeyance here because we're getting close to the end, so I'm not going to ask you that big question. But what I will discuss with you after the break is the whole paganism side of it. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Kayleen White. And Kayleen's a pagan. Kayleen, you've got the healing process going. Did you develop a big following for that? Is it?
No, we had a group of about a dozen people, and people would turn up if they wanted healing. So similar in a lot of ways to what happens in a lot of spiritualist churches. And a lot of the people who came along were spiritualist.
When you say healing, what sort of healing do you mean? What was it that they wanted?
The aim was to provide ease of physical aches and pains, to provide people with an increased sense of well-being and vitality. We certainly didn't try or promise any miracles. We're just aiming to ease people's discomfort and make life a little bit more bearable.
So it was physical healing rather than spiritual healing. Yes, yes. Okay, we're poised and we're moving forward. What's next?
I guess I basically spent a bit of time living, including, ironically perhaps, a few years living on a boat called Harmony.
Yes.
And then in around about 2005, I went to a conference that had been organised in Adelaide, which was called the National Queer Spirituality Conference. And in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex world, there are a lot of people who tend to assume that LGBTI people don't have an interest in spirituality, and this conference was aiming to show that that's not the case, and give us a chance to share our concerns, share our problems, and start working towards solutions, if we could.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're at this LBGTI type in gathering.
Yep.
And then something was exposed to you. What was it that sparked your interest?
In one of the presentations, the presenter talked about the goddess, and the simplest way to explain that is probably the concept of deity, but not as a male being or a genderless being, but as a female being, one which nurtures and cares about the world and people on it. And the concept just clicked. It just felt so comfortable and so right for me that it was a life-changing moment. I thought, okay, this sounds to me exactly like what I've been looking for all this time. So I think I should perhaps look into this a little bit more.
Which had a fairly big impact because you'd been searching and looking in all sorts of places.
That's right.
So what was the really key element? Was it the goddess bit, was it?
It was for me, yes, because it was acknowledging women and the feminine principle as being as inherently equally important to male principle. So there was no male deity over everything. It was saying, well, there's a couple of ways of looking at this, but basically it was saying that the female principle is at least as important as the male. Right from the point of view of creation, because the Wiccan creation method is based around, starts with the female rather than the male.
So that's an interesting way of sort of coming into your spiritual beingness.
Yep.
So, all right, you sparked the interest, then you must have gone further.
Yeah, I came back to Melbourne and I got on the internet and did a little bit of searching. There's a website in America called Witch's Voice, and they have quite a few contacts, and it turned out that somebody had a Wiccan group that was about 2 blocks away. So I made contact with her and joined up to the group and started studying.
Okay, you've brought up the word Wiccan, and we're talking pagan. can you illustrate the difference between those two for us?
Yeah, the easiest way to explain it is probably that pagan tends to be an umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
It includes Wicca, witchcraft, druidry, a whole range of other particular traditions.
Mm-hmm.
In recent years, it doesn't include heathenry, which are people who tend to follow the old Norse gods, who believe in Asatru and traditions like that.
Yes.
So it's sort of an umbrella term for earth-focused religions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm. So, well, when I introduce you as a pagan, is that right? Or should I introduce you as a Wicca? Or what?
These days I identify as pagan.
Mm.
I spent several years studying and being a member of a Wiccan tradition.
Mm.
I actually wound up becoming initiated as a priestess in one tradition and wound up being appointed as first elder of another Wiccan tradition.
Mm.
But my preference is a more broader interest in all of what these paths are leading me to. So I don't want to tie myself to just one particular set of beliefs.
Right.
I'd like to have a broader approach, and as a result, probably about 4 years ago, I decided to start calling myself a pagan rather than
Yes.
calling myself Wiccan.
Yes. So it's a more generic
Yeah.
and inclusive term. So when you're a priestess, what's your principal function? What's the...
Basically, organising rituals. So in that particular temple, it was a teaching temple. We had to learn about the philosophy behind Wicca. We learned about celebrating the seasons. So, for example, we'd celebrate the winter solstice, which is called Yule in the Wiccan tradition. We'd celebrate the full moons, the new moons. And these celebrations, to some extent, refer back to what's called the Wiccan Rede. A lot of people use just one line out of that, which is, and at harm none, do as you will. But the full Wiccan Rede is a fairly long poem, and it talks about honouring the seasons, honouring the goddess.
Yes, so it looks as though we're going to need to come back and talk about this again. Would you be available to follow on this pagan Wiccan exploration?
Absolutely.
That would be good.
Yep.
Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week, and we'll be speaking again with Kayleen White.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu